This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets. Government policies to fight climate change are discouraging oil companies from investing heavily in new production even as they turn in record profits, a dynamic that could spell tight supply and high prices as clean energy alternatives seek to fill the void. Crude oil prices have surged above $90 a barrel, and some analysts predict they will nudge above $100 by year's end. But instead of spending big to boost output, companies are boosting dividends or buying back shares to reward investors. Environmental groups say slowing production growth could accelerate a move to renewable energy and curb carbon emissions.
U.S. crude stocks fell last week, driven by strong crude oil exports, while gasoline and diesel inventories drew down as refiners began annual autumn maintenance, the Energy Information Administration said on Wednesday. Crude inventories fell by 2.1 million barrels in week ending September 15 to 418.5 million barrels, compared with analysts' expectations in a Reuters poll for a 2.2 million barrel drop. Crude stocks at the Cushing, Oklahoma, delivery hub fell by 2.1 million barrels in the last week, EIA said, its lowest since July 2022.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
Russian oil producers supplied their first cargoes of CPC Blend crude to the United Arab Emirates, UAE, in August and September, traders told Reuters, opening up a new export route as Moscow looks to find new customers and skirt Western sanctions. Moscow has found new markets for its oil despite sanctions imposed by G7 countries since the start of the war in Ukraine, which Moscow calls a special military operation. The world's third-largest oil exporter, Russia has rerouted most of its oil to China, India and Turkey over the past year, and has also sent cargoes to countries including Brazil, Sri Lanka and Pakistan. In August and September, two Russian firms, oil major Lukoil and independent producer Cengeo, sold their oil to the UAE.
China's fuel oil imports retreated for a second consecutive month in August, data from the General Administration of Customs showed on Wednesday. Total fuel oil imports were down 8% from July to 1.4 million metric tons in August, though still more than double compared to the same period last year. The imports included purchases under ordinary trade, which is subject to import duty and consumption tax, as well as imports into bonded storages.
Next, we have the top news in metal markets.
The global refined copper market showed a 19,000 metric tons deficit in July, compared with a 72,000 metric tons deficit in June, the International Copper Study Group, ICSG, said in its latest monthly bulletin. For the first 7 months of the year, the market was in a 215,000 metric tons surplus compared with a 254,000 metric tons deficit in the same period a year earlier, the ICSG said. World refined copper output in July was 2.30 million metric tons, while consumption was 2.32 million metric tons.
Russia is considering imposing an additional tax tied to the ruble-dollar rate on exports of metals, fertilizers and some other commodities, sources in two major exporting companies told Reuters on Wednesday. The tax, which may be imposed from October and last until the end of 2023, would apply to all major export contributors to the Russian gross domestic product, GDP, excluding oil, gas, grains, timber, machine building and scrap metal. The idea appeared out of the blue. Discussions about it were kept secret, one of the sources said. We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector. China's soybean imports from Brazil rose 45% in August from a year earlier, data showed on Wednesday, as a huge crop produced by the South American nation this year continued to flow to the world's top buyer. China imported 9.09 million metric tons of the oilseed from Brazil last month, according to the General Administration of Customs showed, almost all of the 9.36 million tons of total soybeans that arrived in China during August. Brazil's market share to China remained the same even though Chinese buyers ramped up purchases from the world's top supplier due to attractive prices of this year's record Brazilian soy crop.
That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.